Welcome to Tribe Talk, everyone. You're here with Laura Neal
and Rachel Evans.
And today we're talking about the impact of staff changes in residential care. So if you're working in residential care, you probably know that the turnover of staff can be fairly high. Sometimes you work in a home where there's a relatively stable staff team, but other times staff come and go. It's the type of job where people move homes quite often, and you're really lucky if you've got a stable team. So what do people do when they don't have a stable team, and they might have people who come and then leave the job fairly quickly, or they come and they're an agency member of staff, so they're just there to cover somebody who is on leave or not on shift that day. Having new people, new things to learn all the time is a big challenge. So there's lots of things that come with new members of staff that residential homes and residential teams have to navigate on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I think for us in work settings, when things change like that, it just becomes part of life, isn't it? People come and go, people try different careers out, they might leave roles. But for our children, when there's big changes like that, or there's a new face that comes into the home, like an agency member of staff, that is big for our kids. So we're going to talk about that today, and why that happens with children that have care experience, how they feel in those types of situations, but also what we can be doing to support those changes, because they are inevitable.
The important thing we want to try and think about today is, what does the child see? So a child who's in residential care, that is their home, it's where they live. The people who are there are the people there who are caring for them and supporting them. So if those people are coming and going, how does that look to that child? How does it look when there are changes of staff? There's new people on shift. There's people who maybe come and then disappear, and relationships that are broken. One of the most important things is to be able to put ourselves in the child's shoes, to really think about what they see and how they think about these situations, because that gives us the foundation of how to help them.
Definitely, and like you said, being in a residential setting, that is the child's home, so we've got to be really respectful of people who are coming and going, that are on shift. You know, that is the young person's home. That's not just their bedroom that they're staying in, but that's all communal areas. And essentially, because we talk about it quite a lot in our residential meetings, there's somebody coming into that child's home. So we've got to be mindful on how we kind of manage that, and what that looks like to our children. And that's particularly important for agency staff that might be doing their very first shift.
It's a really important role, and I mean, as an agency staff worker, thinking about, if you're going into a new home, I'm going into a child's home. This is their home, and if you were to walk into my home or Rachel's home, how would you act in that situation? It probably might feel a bit different than if you're walking into a residential home, but remembering that's the child's home. Yeah.
So what the child is seeing in that situation, say there's a new member of staff or an agency member of staff that is coming on shift, what they are seeing is, who is this stranger coming into my house?
Yeah, I don't know this person. What are they going to do? Are they a scary person?
Yes. Am I moving?
Yeah, that's what the child will be seeing.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we've just got to reframe, or like you said, just look at it, the situation from the child's point of view. What are they seeing from this situation? And like how would you react? First shift, being with a child, isn't it? Going into their home. Because it would be a very scary moment for a child, or definitely a moment where they'd feel a little bit uncertain, worried, like, why is this person here? It would just bring about a lot of questions for the child.
Just thinking about today, actually, so we have some workmen scheduled to deliver something to my house today. I've had three phone calls off my children to say, when are they coming? What are they going to be like? What are they going to be doing when they're here? Because they're nervous about it, and that's just somebody coming to drop something off and then go again.
Not to spend a shift in your house.
Not to spend a shift who's brand new. So it just, it shows the impact it can have, doesn't it?
Yeah. So this is why it's important that we plan for and just open the discussion really about bringing it to the forefront of practitioners, but specifically residential support workers, to the forefront of your mind. So we are considering this when we are going on shift and supporting children that are in residential care. So when we're supporting children that are care experienced and children that are in residential care, just for the purpose of this podcast, we often talk about therapy, programs of work, and direct work, those key worker sessions, as though that is our intervention, that is our program of work that we tend to be following. But I think the most important thing to be considering is how the relationships and the way that we build rapport and relationships with children is part of that intervention, and it plays an important part of that support. How we build relationships with children, how we're interacting with them on a day-to-day basis, so they can feel comfortable in our presence. I think, and especially the point that you made initially, Laura, about an adult, a staff worker coming into their home. We've got to, it's our jobs then to make sure that we are building that relationship with children.
Yeah, and who's building the relationship with children is important as well, because if it's an agency worker that's coming for a day and then is not going to come back again, it's not that worker that's going to be building that relationship, but it might be somebody who's already there and has that relationship and can reassure that child in the moment.
Yeah, I think we advise quite a lot on just how we interact with children. I think it's not talked about enough, I don't think. I don't know what your opinion is on it, but it's a big deal.
It is, absolutely.
How we did a training recently and we were reflecting on it with the residential staff, and whenever I'm going into a new home, I like to know a little bit about the child, a little bit about their interests. So that first interaction that I have with them, it's received as positive. And I give the example of going to a residential home, knew very little about this young girl, but managed to get a conversation going with her where I had some smiles back, and she's engaged in those conversations with me. And even though, like you said, I could have been classed as like an agency member of staff, I'm not someone there that's long term, but the barriers were broken down initially. She knew why I was there and we could have a positive conversation. It was about hair and hair products, you know, but it's about tapping into that interest to, like I said, to make that interaction really positive.
Yeah.
But I just don't think it's talked about enough. It's not just turning up and doing a shift. It's how you're going to interact with that child.
I do think that's a misconception sometimes, that being a residential worker is about turning up and providing a standard of care. But actually it's about turning up, providing a standard of care with a relationship and everything else that goes along with that. And particularly if you're a permanent member of staff in that residential home, it's about those relationships that you have with young people and how you build those relationships, how you take them forward, how you're able to, with a relationship, put boundaries in, but also have fun times as well. And it's that mix and getting that right, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I was going to follow up with like those professional boundaries that you have to put in place, because it becomes a bit of a second home to residential staff, because you're sleeping in. So it can become very easy, or people can fall into the trap of blurring those boundaries a little bit in terms of some of the conversations that you might have. But having those professional boundaries in place, but also being seen as fun, and we can have fun conversations, we can do fun activities together, is so important.
And someone that children can trust.
Yes.
So they can trust you, they can build that relationship, they can talk to you, they can confide in you over time, obviously. These things take a long time to build, particularly with our children in residential care. They're usually there because they have a higher level of need than other children. And we want to be prioritising building that relationship if we're a permanent member of staff in that home.
Definitely.
Because that can then actually support when there are less permanent members of staff. So when you do get turnover of staff, when you have agency workers, when you have people who move on to other roles and they leave the home, you can be the person who has that relationship with that child and can support them moving forward.
Yeah, you have that cohort then, and you have that consistent members of that staff team that you can utilise when you do have agency staff for one particular day, for whatever reason that is. But yeah, interactions with children is really important to build that relationship, because that's the foundation. It's like you said, building that trust.
So what we want to build in residential homes is as much predictability as possible. So consistency is one thing, but predictability is another thing. So consistency would be the staff that are coming in on a regular basis. But what we know is we can't always achieve consistency because there are people who have leave. Everybody has leave every year. Or you have people who move on, they don't work there anymore. And as we've talked about, a high turnover and a high level of agency staff in some homes. But if we can't create that consistency, how can we create that predictability? So it's predictable that somebody comes in every day. If there's a new person, that a young person knows about that new person. If there's regularly several new people, that the young person knows as much about that as they can within the moment. So we're creating that predictability even though we can't have complete consistency.
Yeah, so important to have, to ensure that predictability exists within staffing as much as possible, isn't it? But also, like you were saying earlier, Laura, about how trust is developed, and going back to what we were speaking about, how we start that by our interactions that we initially have with children, and how we build relationships with them and rapport build, because all that is foundational to developing a trusting relationship, or that child feels like we can trust them. But then that's how we can also support their wider needs, like how they regulate their emotions, how we manage some of those emotional and behavioural outbursts. Once you've got that relationship with children, all that becomes a lot more manageable. From all that foundational work that you're doing with children to build relationships.
Yeah, because emotional regulation, lots of young people come into residential care because they can't emotionally regulate. And for them to learn that, it needs to be modelled to them so that they can then copy that. And you need someone there who's co-regulating. And that only comes with relationships. So you have to be forming those relationships, because otherwise you're firefighting all the time when they get dysregulated and they heighten, as they inevitably will.
Yeah. Like you said, children that are in residential care, they usually have that higher level of need and higher level of support that they need. So those moments of emotional dysregulation are going to be inevitable.
If we're talking about either trauma-informed or therapeutic care, these are things that are really fundamental and foundational. If you haven't got any level of consistency, if you haven't got any level of predictability, if you're not able to build those relationships and maintain those relationships with key members of staff, then you're not really being a trauma-informed or therapeutic home. So really thinking about those and how you can integrate those. They're the foundations of trauma-informed care and any therapeutic care that you want to build in as well. The majority of children in residential care have got trauma backgrounds, which means they've experienced multiple relationships usually that have broken down. So people who've disappeared, people who have rejected them, people who have let them down in the past, people who they love more than anything in the world, but they no longer see anymore. So all of these things compound. So when you have staff members who come and go, or staff members who come, they start to trust, and then they disappear, this can have a huge impact, a far bigger impact than it has on any other child who hasn't had these experiences. So this is why being really mindful of staffing in residential care and having a consistent staff team, but if you can't have a consistent staff team, how you deal with that unpredictability is so important for these children.
So I think the first tip that we would share is, and this would be true for any change, but in the context of staff members maybe leaving the residential home, we would be advising that we prepare children as early as possible so we can plan for a bit of a thorough transition out, so they can say goodbye in more appropriate ways, and that there's a bit of an extended goodbye, so it gives the child chance to process what's going on, say their goodbyes, and maybe build a new relationship with a new member of staff.
Yeah. I think this is relevant for if there's a long-term member of staff who is moving on somewhere else. Preparing the child early, or the children early within the home. Never leaving that till the day that they go in.
No.
It can be something that people really avoid, I think, because it's going to be difficult. You're probably going to get some behaviour spikes around that.
It's a difficult conversation to have, right?
It's absolutely normal. It's normal for all of our children, regardless of what trauma they've experienced in their background. If you've got a big change, so somebody that you've relied upon for a long time, you've got a relationship with, and they go in and they're moving somewhere else, you're going to get those behaviour increases, those difficulties, those emotional outbursts. So knowing that they're going to happen and preparing early is best, because you give that child opportunity to say goodbye, to ask any questions, to be supported through that. Whereas if you do it on the day, last minute, you're probably going to get huge outbursts afterwards.
Yeah, and especially if a child's key worker is leaving the service, I would say that takes a little bit more planning, because you'd want to plan in some sessions where there's some overlap, or some times where there's overlap, so that new key worker can learn from you essentially and know how to build that relationship. But that's done in a very safe way with another residential support worker, the child's previous key worker, because the child feels safe and they've got that trusted relationship.
Do a handover, so that they're transitioning that relationship to somebody else. Because what we need to remember is there's going to be so many people in these children's past who have let them down, disappeared at the last moment. So this could mirror, if you don't prepare, if you don't address it early on, it could mirror their previous trauma experiences.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because you're reinforcing some of those beliefs that they have on relationships. Everyone
leaves me, adults can't be trusted. Why should I make a relationship with you, because everyone else has left me? And we don't want to be creating that. So this is definitely what we would do for longer term residential workers that have been there for a long time. For shorter term residential workers, so definitely for agency workers, you don't need to prepare every child for every agency worker that's leaving, because that would be, one, unrealistic, and two, it would just create a perpetual cycle of people are leaving, and we're preparing you for this. But for those longer term workers, definitely prepare, and as soon as possible.
So in relation to that as well, preparing children as early as possible, you made a couple of points about how we would communicate that information to someone, to a child, and I think it's so important to acknowledge those endings and not to avoid those conversations. Acknowledge not just that ending, but how a child may feel, especially for a long-standing member of staff, or like you said, a key worker. It's important that we are labelling that, but also supporting their emotional well-being around that, because it is sad. It's okay to be sad, but how do we manage that safely?
Yeah, so acknowledge those endings, let them know that they're going to happen, talk about them afterwards as well. So it's okay to talk about them. It becomes part of what you talk about. It might be that if there's a residential worker that's been there for a long time, that they stay in contact with the staff team. So you can even give updates where you're saying, oh, this is what they're doing now, or they're sending you their love, or they've been asking how you're doing, so that it's not that it's just a complete ending, and they know that they're still asking about them.
Yeah. It's just normalising that, because I do think it's so easy to shy away from those conversations, or like you said, put it off, and then it's the day before someone's leaving, and then you've got to communicate that to a child, and it can cause a bit more of a fallout, and you haven't given the child the opportunity to ask questions, to say goodbye how they would want to. So just having those conversations, acknowledging those endings and acknowledging the child's feelings and emotions around that, so we can normalise some of those negative emotions that we are feeling about a member of the team leaving. That is okay to feel that way, but you've got all these other people around you that can support you throughout this time.
Another point that occurred to me as you were talking then, it's managers who manage residential homes remembering that this needs to be communicated to children as well. I think from a management perspective, your immediate thought is, oh, how are we covering these shifts? Because we've got to make sure that the shifts are covered and we've got the people here to be able to care for the children. And sometimes I think as adults we can forget, okay, now we need to communicate this to the child as well, and that's where it gets left till the last minute. So making sure that that's part of our process is just built in, that however long before, and you can decide on this as a residential home yourself, but it could be 3 or 4 weeks before that person goes, that child is made aware, and then there's a transition so that they know what's going to happen. So when there's new members of staff, so if you have staff leaving, you also have new members of staff who will be joining. I think thinking about what responsibilities they have and what relationship they're going to be building up with what child is really important. If there's new members of staff frequently, to expect a child to build relationships with multiple new members of staff and change those relationships all the time is not realistic. Like we wouldn't do that as adults. It's really unrealistic to ask children and children who've experienced trauma to do it. So if there are consistent members of staff, just thinking about what the distribution of roles and responsibilities are. So who's the key worker for each individual child? Can that be somebody who is here on a permanent basis, is around more often, so that when these new members of staff come in, the change is less significant for young people because they've got their key person who's there for them. The new people who are coming are playing a more periphery role in their care and support where possible. Now, we have to acknowledge that this isn't always possible within residential care, because there are some residential settings where there is a higher turnover of staff. But if you've got that little consistent staff team, using those people to be the main people who support young people or who are their key workers that are there specifically for them, so that change isn't as significant for young people.
I think that's important, isn't it? Like having your key workers, your key kind of cohort that is spending more time with the child or with the children, and they're doing the majority of like the interactions that they have in those key worker sessions, going out on activities. But then you've got that agency member of staff that is taking a bit of a back seat or not in that lead role in terms of the day-to-day care for a child, and having that protected time with the key worker that's round a little bit more, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think to be communicating with young people as well, and you don't have to communicate, and we wouldn't advocate for communicating every change in staff if you've got a high turnover of staff, but communicating that these are your key people. These people on the periphery, they'll change, particularly if they're agency staff. They will change, and they will change. It might be every shift, it might be on a consistent basis, but there will always be this number of people here to support you. And what we would do in those circumstances as well is maybe create visuals, so young people can see, this is my key worker, this is the person who's here to support me. These people, they might change, but there'll always be two members of staff on. I don't always know who they are, but I always know there'll be 2 members of staff here. So where you can give as much predictability as possible, do that. So if you know they're going to be specific people, but they're going to change at different points, you can name those people. If you know the members of staff are always going to be male members of staff, for example, then you can say that to create as much of that predictability as possible as you can for children, even when you can't get that consistency.
Yeah, and I think that leads us on nicely to our next tip, which is all about if we can keep the environment as consistent as possible, and in terms of like our routines. So if a child's routines remain consistent, that's communicated to the wider team, then that will support a child in feeling safe and secure within their own home, and you, like you said, you just have the staff members around that still running that same routine, but there's very little change within that other than someone new coming in.
Yeah, which brings us to then, I think, documentation that sets out that routine for staff, because if you've got lots of new members of staff coming in, they have to learn that routine when they come in. So you need easy access, quick documentation that they can read, where they know what the routine is, what they should be doing at different points. And I would say always like label what individual members of staff should be doing. So for example, if you have 2 residential workers on, residential worker 1 does this, residential worker 2 does this, if you've got key things that need to happen, because the responsibilities are very clear then, and they know exactly what they're doing when they come in. And residential staff prefer that, to come into a home and know, this is what I'm doing today, and if I do these things, I know I'm getting my job right. That's what they want.
And that is so important within residential care, because there's so many different adults around, there's so many different support workers around, where things like routines might be interpreted very differently from one person to the next. So we advocate a lot for this within our training. This is how you create that consistency and predictability, by having these protocols, these value chains like set out very clearly, so staff members coming on to shift, they can just mimic what the previous shift had done. So everybody is responding, setting the environment up in exactly the same way to keep things as consistent as possible for our children.
Yeah, that's probably the number one thing that I would say, if in any residential home, it's keeping those routines consistent across people is the most important thing.
It's foundational.
Yeah.
You need to have all that in place before we even think about anything further.
Yeah.
It's really important to have those foundations, like your routines and your boundaries, set in stone. All staff are following that to keep the home running, providing that consistent care. That's what essentially is the most important thing.
Our final tip today is to have really good handovers. So handovers come into play when you have a handover from one key worker to another key worker, if there's an end of one key worker working with that young person, but they also come in at the end of shifts, of shift changeovers as well. So let's start off by talking about handovers between key workers. When you do a handover between one key worker and another key worker, you'd want to be handing over really critical relational information about that young person, and information about where they are developmentally, any programs of support that have been done. So starting off relationally, thinking about what is it that they like, they don't like, what's worked really well for the key worker that's outgoing, that the key worker that's incoming can do exactly the same. And this could be like little tips, like when they get really frustrated, I find this really works, or when we're out and about and they're not following any of the guidance that I give them, if you do this can be really helpful. Those are they're just so vital, aren't they, to know those tips and to hand them over.
Yeah, like those nuggets of information. Or I find the child opens up more when we're on a car journey, or I set my key worker sessions up like this, because it helps with the engagement of that key worker session. But all that information, I know some homes that we've worked in, they have that like 1-page profile, and that's more of like a school term, but an all about me profile. Anything that we can add to that, update that, is really important. So the key worker that's going to be taking on those sessions, like you said, knows what the child likes, what's important to them, what strategies are you using to promote engagement. They know all of that information and is part of those overlap sessions where the two key workers can attend the same one. So they're learning how to not only build in a relationship, but they're learning how to continue those key worker sessions without the previous key worker, when they go.
Yeah, I feel like some of that knowledge is knowledge that will naturally happen in discussion sometimes if you have a one session handover. Something that I feel gets missed all the time is, what are we working on with this child or young person? What can they do? What couldn't they do when they joined our residential home? What can they do now? What are we still working on? What is their plan for that we're working on in the future? And that could be a combination of anything. It could be emotional skills, social skills. It could be that you're working on independent living skills.
Yeah.
But having a really clear handover of what's being worked on for that young person and how far they've come is really important as well. So what couldn't they do that they can do now?
And every home that we've worked in operates very differently.
Yeah.
So the new key worker knows where they get that information from as well. From some of the homes that we support, we provide assessments and then care planning for that. So the key worker has their sessions planned out, and you've got this long-term plan, isn't it, of what we're focusing on in each key worker session. But not all homes have that structure set up. So it's knowing, how do I guide my key worker sessions, or what information is going to guide these key worker sessions, so I know what topics that I'm teaching is important, and how you develop and deliver those sessions. It's a skill.
Absolutely.
I think I have planned a podcast for later on in the year about what makes key worker sessions really effective and really good. So that'd be a good one to tune into if you're interested.
So that's the key worker session. So shift handover is just as important though, particularly if you've got new staff coming in. Having a really good shift handover is absolutely vital. I can't tell you the number of times we've missed or not been able to undertake a therapy session because the shift handover from one shift to another just hasn't been good enough, and we phoned in the morning to remind the home, we're coming for a therapy session, gone in the afternoon, and the shift handovers happened and that information hasn't been passed on. So that is absolutely vital, and I think it's more vital when you've got new people coming in and you've got changes of staff, because they're going to really rely on that to know what they're doing, what's happened for young people, what is planned in terms of activities for that day. So having a really good shift handover is essential. And
we've worked in homes in the past where they have an agency staff booklet.
Yeah.
So it's everything that you need to know about the children that's in our care for this shift. So that might be how you respond to challenging behaviour, how you set up their routines, how they like their meal times to kind of be structured. So any need to knows, especially for agency workers coming in that, like you said, are doing that more periphery care. They can just pick up that. They spend a little bit of time reading before shift starts, alongside the more team meeting kind of shift handover is really important. Again, we come back to those terms and we creating consistency and predictability. So things are and feel consistent to the child, even if it is a new face coming to the home.
Yeah. So those are our tips. Rachel, we've got a question to finish off. And the question is, whenever we get new staff, one young person immediately starts refusing support and becoming aggressive. It feels like they're pushing every new person away. How should we respond to this?
Yeah, so in the context of having new staff that we know are employed, for example, they are sticking around or intend to stick around, I think it comes back to our points around how are we building rapport, how are we building relationships, what are our interactions, and really planning and being thoughtful around how we're doing that. Because if we're not taking the time to get to know the children getting to know us, they're not going to trust us. And you're gonna see increases in challenging behaviour because you're just a stranger to them. So I would say that as being building rapport and thinking about, even if you come off shift and you think, oh, that today didn't go really well, they've pushed me away, rather than accepting defeat, what am I going to do tomorrow?
Yeah.
Because showing up and again being consistent, you might not need to change anything, you know, but just being consistent, showing up is actually showing the child that I'm showing up for you. It doesn't matter how you behaved towards me yesterday, I'm still here and I care about you. So you're showing them that you care rather than just telling them. So I would say that being one tip. And then for agency members of staff, then when you are coming into contact with children that are becoming particularly aggressive or pushing you away, think back to what we were talking about in terms of that key kind of cohort of consistent members of staff, and lean on them a little bit more. Don't expect to have this relationship, this trusting relationship with a child when you're not planning to be around for long term. So it's important to kind of go into shift knowing that, and then allowing the people that are around the child, like the key workers and residential staff that really know the children, to be guiding the plans around how we respond to challenging behaviour and how we respond in different ways when things become particularly difficult. But just setting your expectations. Like, this is a hard, like you said, Laura, a hard job to do. You can take something like that scenario really personally. But if you're just agency going in for a day or two, don't expect to have these relationships with children.
And I think set your expectations is what you said, and I think that's really important. So your expectation might be that actually I'm supporting on the periphery because these other people are the core people within this child's life, and that's okay.
Yeah, setting those expectations. Otherwise you could leave that shift feeling really disheartened, taking that challenging behaviour really personal, but that wasn't the expectation for the day. You just needed to be that extra person on shift to support the level of care being provided.
Yeah, and I guess if this is a child whose key worker is going, or main person that is their main person for support is leaving and somebody new is coming in, expect them to react like that, because very often they will not just push the person who's leaving away, they'll push everybody else away as well, because if they've left, then you're going to leave too. So you've got to build that relationship back up, and you've got to prove to them that no, I'm here and I'm staying and I'm still here for you. And if you expect that to happen, it can make it a much easier shift than if you're expecting it to all be okay, because they will automatically have transferred their relationships and attachment to you, because it just doesn't work like that. Yeah,
these things take time.
Yeah,
building relationships enough where children feel that they can trust you, it takes time. So if I was going to give any tips, don't feel disheartened when you are pushed away. Keep trying, like you said, turn up the next day, the exact same person, be that, and show them that you can be consistent.
Yeah, be that consistent person. So the one key takeaway from today's podcast is, within residential care, you can't always have consistency with members of staff, but what you can have is as much predictability as possible. So if you have a staff team that isn't consistent, or if you're working in a staff team that isn't consistent, think about how you can build as much predictability as you can in for the children that you're caring for and supporting.
And if you want to know more information about trauma-informed care, then subscribe to Tribe Talk.